So you've
Okay.
practically lived a life of imagination. I've honestly read your biography and it sounds really, really inspiring. But like, what exactly are your dreams for the Great Green Wall? If you could picture it in 2030 when it's completed, what do you envision following the film, following the process, following the whole idea behind it? Where do you really see the wall at the end, really?
Well, the first thing that attracted me to the Great Green Wall is that it's an African vision. And it's the fact that it began with Thomas Sankara in the 1980s. He realized that he may not have quite understood, the seriousness of global warming or climate change back then, but they could see that they were suffering a lot of extensive droughts and that the Sahara was beginning to impinge into the Sahel. So he came up with this idea of like 800 villages, 800 forests in Burkina Faso. And in a sense, that became the seed of the Great Green Wall. And he envisaged this going right across the Sahel. Unfortunately, very likely with French compliance, he was assassinated. And with that, the dream died until 2005, as Elvis mentioned. The Nigerian government brought it back to the African Union, and in 2007, it was adopted by the African Union. And since then, a lot of progress has been made, but always at the beginning of anything, like an aircraft taking off, the thing that takes most time and energy is the actual takeoff. Once it's in the air, then, it's literally cruising. And I think we're kind of now just beyond the takeoff point in terms of the Great Green Wall. Like 18% of it has actually been so far completed. And the target date, although this is not fixed in stone in a sense, is 2030, because as the African Union makes the point that this is not about planting trees, this is about growing trees. So it's fundamentally about an altered relationship with nature. And it's the fact that these trees actually provide all sorts of benefits for communities. Number one, they're about increasing and protecting biodiversity. They're about creating canopy cover for the ground, which allows moisture to go back into the soil. It's about helping to regenerate degraded land. It's about food security. It's about giving hope, green jobs, and so on. So for me, my dream is that we would see, like literally, a desert becoming a verdant plain, and a place where people could see hope. And as Elvis mentioned, one of the great things about the Great Green Wall is that, initially it was 11 countries spreading from Senegal in the west to the Republic of Djibouti in the east. But other countries have come to the African Union saying, we have a lot of dry land, we have a lot of the same problems and challenges that people in the Sahel are facing. We would like to be part of this. And so now it's over 20 countries, and you have I talk about the Great Green Wall going across the Sahel as the trunk of the tree in a sense, but then there are two very important branches, one going along the northern rim of the continent, and the other then growing deep down into the southern drylands. And so my dream is that we see, if you look behind me at the map of Africa, you can see like that 60% of the continent is, as Elvis mentioned, like is essentially drylands. So that's a huge challenge, but it also is a huge possibility because we have seen huge examples, particularly in the 18% of the Great Green Wall that already has been delivered, that you can literally make the desert fertile. And really that's what's happening here, So in one sense, we're looking at a potential mirage, but then we can actually turn that mirage into a miracle where other people can, and young people. I think it's really important that we also recognize that, Africa is the youngest continent on the planet. And that by the year 2050, which is less than 30 years away, the workforce will be 3 times the size of the workforce in China. So that is a huge potential, or it's literally like a powder keg, you know, demographics being the powder and unemployment being the detonator. So it's in the interest of not just Africa, but the whole world, that we create opportunities of hope for this wonderful nation, or this wonderful continent of many nations. And it's the most abused continent on the planet. You know, Europeans have colonized it, you know, stole its people, stole its resources, and now it's time for us to give something back to the continent, but really to work in solidarity with the African Union, to work in solidarity with the African people in delivering this. Because again, the Great Green Wall is not just about, you know, the continent of Africa. It is an African solution also to the existential threat facing all humanity of, you know, climate breakdown and global warming.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that.
My dream is that it will be the beginning of a reawakening of confidence, belief in itself amongst the African people.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you, Don. So the next question now about giving back is, Alex, what actually made you go behind the film, The Great Green Wall?
Thanks so much. Well, I think for me, you know, and Don has spoken to this, I think, to a great degree. But for me, really, the Great Green Wall is one of the great, you know, resilient stories of our times. It's, you know, taking root in one of the world's most vulnerable regions to climate change, where, you know, people are living with the daily realities of temperature rises, persistent crop failures, food insecurity, not in an abstract or distant future, but right now. And at the same time, there's this kind of incredible story of hope of communities on the front line fighting back. And I think that, you know, from a filmic perspective, you know, the wall is obviously kind of, you know, hugely impressive in terms of its intended size. You know, once complete, you know, it's estimated it could be the largest living structure on the planet, 3 times the length of the Great Barrier Reef. But I think more than that, it's really a wall, you know, unlike any other that we've seen in human history. It's not a wall designed to tear, you know, people apart like many other walls, but really one with a kind of a quite breathtaking vision to unite people across a continent. And really, yeah, as Don said, you know, a global symbol of hope for our common humanity that we really must deliver on. And so I think as much as the story of the Great Green Wall is about restoring land and planting trees, it's mainly about the incredible resilience of people living with the daily fallout of climate breakdown. And I think that, you know, in the film, we really wanted to capture that daily struggle and illuminate the kind of the interconnected challenges linked with the climate crisis that don't, you know, often make headlines. You know, also looking at the kind of the roots of Europe's migrant crisis, or the disappearing of Lake Chad and its role in sparking terrorism in the region through Boko Haram and other groups. And we also wanted to show that in many ways, this is a canary in the coal mine for all of our futures. It's happening today in the Sahel, but in 30 years time, you know, this could be all of our futures. So as much as this is an African story, we felt it was also a global story too. And so I think, you know, the big conundrum as filmmakers really was how to capture these stakes, but also at the same time, how to inspire hope. And how to tell the story of the Great Green Wall, which is ostensibly is about trees, which could end up being a little dull, in a way that really connects with audiences. And I think that that's why also we decided that music could be an extraordinary device to capture the humanity and the stories of people across this continent. And in that regard, yeah, we're so lucky to find such an amazing protagonist in Emoja, who takes us on that journey.
So much. Thank you so much, Alex, for that. And for those of us in the audience who are yet to see the film, we will be sharing how to get access to the film after this discussion session. Now, to get a bit more technical, because I'm sure a lot of people are still trying to figure out how a desert is going to transform into an entire land full of planted trees. Sarah, so given your background, access to water is obviously a big part to tree planting, and we are way away from the massive drought in the Sahel. So what are the plans to actually integrate water into the Sahel to enable, the planting of the magnificent trees?
Thank you for having me. So that's quite a tricky question because you can get extremely technical, and it will probably and is always the main discussion when we talk about tree planting. It requires water, and as you know, the Saharan desert itself is quite drought prone, and it's also there's very little rainfall. So that's the reality that we're dealing with. However, you have to look at things like resource management as a pool for well-being and equity for people. So it requires a lot of planning, It shouldn't be the one thing that pops up in the discussion and sort of, dismisses the importance of a project like this. And the way to get about it, which has been very, very successful, and, the top agri-tech businesses are going back to this and referring back to this idea, which is to integrate indigenous know-how with scientific technology. So people have been working on agriculture for years and years in the Sahara Desert and in this region. And I know that it's quite difficult to grasp the fact, but these communities have a huge sense of insight and foresight. They have very sophisticated adaptation techniques that have been harvested, and they've also been inherited for many, many, many years. So, and it's been successful, and we've seen this in various parts of the project. So what you need to do is, use simple harvesting techniques, use water infiltration techniques so that the water doesn't run off. The soil itself doesn't become, like dust, basically. And you need to retain water when there is rainfall. This is nothing new. These are techniques that have been practiced and very, very well rehearsed in all areas. And we will need to revert back to these techniques simply because it's proven that in the developing world, I'm talking from Egypt, that there is a big gap in research and development. There is a big gap in the accessibility to have technology come in and solve all your problems. So we do need to rely on a hybrid mechanism of when we use simplicity can actually be the most intelligent approach to such a problem. So it would be wonderful to have more R&D investment for such a project to sustain and to look at climate change, increasing heat, and recharging the soil content as part of this project in an ongoing way, to have the global, the technical, the scientific, and also the local community engaged together in order to preserve water, but also keep the Great Green Wall project a dream and actually make it very relevant and absorbent to the circumstances.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Sarah. So this is back to you, Elvis. So over the top of my head, I really can't condone how you're planting trees in the desert, but I think you'll be able to help us understand what it actually means to be planting trees in the desert and, equating what Sarah has said about water availability. Is this possible, and how possible is it going to look like over the next few years of implementation? Elvis? Hello, Elvis? I think you're muted.
Hello, Augusta?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah.
Did you hear me, please?
No, it was a bit faint.
Okay, so I was asking, following Sarah's contributions on the provision of water, how feasible is it actually to plant billions of trees across the deserts technically?
Augusta, yeah, I think that's a good question. But as Don said, the real question is how to make this tree grow.
Right.
As far as planting of trees is concerned, it's very simple. You go there with a cup of water, you dig a hole, you put a tree, you cover it, you put water under, and you go. That's simple, but how do you get these trees to grow? That is the question. And you've brought it, how do you make a tree to grow in an area where the biggest challenge is availability of water? But as you know, Augusta, when there is the challenge of availability of water, it means there is more competition for that water. And that is the biggest challenge in the drylands of Africa, the competition for water and arable land. And so for you to grow trees, billions of trees, it's a Herculean task. Because first of all, before you grow the tree, you have to take care of the other needs of the other stakeholders and the other actors that are within that landscape. That is when the issue of landscape approach comes in. So before you plant the trees, you have to take care of the water, you have to take care of the pastoralist communities, and 60% of the activities for instance, in the Sahel is pastoralism. Millions of animals, millions of heads of cattle, camels, donkeys, goats, sheep, and wild animals roaming around looking for the slightest green thing to eat up and for the slightest source of water to suck up. And so for you to plant trees here, you have to take care of these alternatives, of these alternative uses of water. You have to take care of the agriculture. How do you get, you can't be talking about water for planting trees when people don't even have that to plant vegetables, which is the mainstay of their subsistence. And so there is the need, a huge need. And what we do in the field is to take care of these things. You look at the pastoralist communities, which are most of them are, before you start going into sedentary farming, into going to plant trees, you have to protect the trees sometimes with barbed wires. Sometimes you even feel like putting electric fences for those trees. And so it's a combination of diverse intervention for those trees to grow. And that is what has been happening. Diverse interventions, both human and natural, because we also use what we call natural selection, where you go into a parkland, and then there are trees that are coming up during the rainy season, and then you select what we call a natural assisted regeneration. You select the healthiest tree, and you remove those that are going to die anyway, and you protect the other ones to grow. And so there is a multitude of approaches and a multitude of things to do for a tree to grow, for one tree to grow. That is why we've been having all this argument about $1 for a tree. It's impossible. If you want a tree to grow, you should start from $15 to $30 because you have to protect it. Yeah, so it's a combination of many things. It's a challenging thing, but it's working when you use the landscape approach, taking care of all the needs of those actors and factors that are around the trees. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Elvis. We're gonna come back to this discussion about the ecology and actually protecting the trees, because that is a huge part of basically what the project is about. So I honestly think there needs to be more awareness about it. So I'm gonna pop over to Don now and have the social conversations. So migration from and through the region have been vast. I mean, through the past few years, I'm Nigerian, and I know people who have migrated across the region have actually gone to the Sahel. Through the video, through the movie, we saw how that was depleted. But what kind of opportunities do you think the wall will provide for people once the wall has been built?
Well, I think it's really interesting, just very briefly going back to what Elvis was saying, because it might seem shocking, because there are some groups who actually promote like the planting of a tree for maybe 50 cents or $1. And, Elvis has just talked about the possibility it could be, $15 to $20. I think it's really worth digging into that, because really I think it answers a lot of what you're talking about, because, that $15 to $20 actually is about a relationship, over many, many years, because it's not just about putting a seedling in the ground and hoping, against hope that it will survive. It needs to be cared for, it needs to be watered, it needs to be protected. And all of that is creating green jobs. And again, I was just thinking that if you ever have a chance to come to Ireland, I'd love to take you to the west of Ireland, because in the 19th century, Ireland suffered a great famine. It wasn't actually a famine, because wheat, barley, corn, oats, grazing land for livestock were flourishing as cash crops for export. But the staple diet of the poor, because of dispossessions and more poor people being forced to survive on less and less land, people put all of their eggs in the basket of literally the Elvis, could you mute yourself, please? Thanks. People put all of their hopes in the basket of the potato. And the potato was fine in good weather and in good seasons, but a virus came, and for 7 years, it affected the potato crop. And, literally, we lost, in a 30-year period, half our entire population, to hunger and disease and to immigration. From almost 9 million people, to this day, our entire population on the island is 6 million. So we've never recovered, actually, from that social catastrophe in the 19th century. And this is, again, I was thinking of this when I listened to Sarah talk about the importance of traditional knowledge, amongst the communities. And if I brought you back to the west of Ireland, you'll actually see what's known as potato ridges and the rolling of the hills. And this was very poor land, but poor people had to exist upon it. But it's so poor that once the people died, the land has been left there. So their work is literally etched into the landscape, which you can actually see to this day. But the British refer to these rolling potato crops as lazy beds. They called them lazy beds. And because they were actually growing 3 rows of potatoes on each of the ridges. And they thought this was a very lazy way to do it, that each row should actually have its own ridge. But what they didn't realize was that people who were forced to try and eke out an existence on less and less land had learned that by rolling the land this way, and putting 3 ridges of 3 rows of potatoes on it, you actually increase the acreage by half. So it was a very intelligent use of the land. And that's what exists in the Sahel and in Africa as well. And the importance, therefore, of actually working, with local people and their traditional knowledge, which has been accumulated over thousands of years. Yeah. And, so just could you reorientate my thinking again there, just so in terms of I finalize the question that you asked me, I just want to get back to it. Just remind me again, and I'll very quickly conclude.
Yeah, so I was wondering what kind of opportunities will bring for people who are applying to leave the continent. So the migration crisis has obviously been appended.
Yeah, well, and part of the point that I wanted to make as well, that we had huge immigration from Ireland, but most people would not have left the country if they had been able to stay with their traditional families and communities and had hope, So this whole issue of immigration and the fear, because now what we're looking at, we've seen Trump's border wall in the south in terms of people coming up from Central America. And we've seen how there's been a huge pushback by Europe. It's now becoming Fortress Europe, and it's not a place where people are being welcomed. But yet people in desperation are trying to get to these kind of promised lands, but sometimes they're not so promising after all, So what we've got to do is give them hope. We've got to give them hope. And I think that's what the Great Green Wall is offering, is hope and the opportunity in terms of so many opportunities in terms of, forestry, in terms of farming, in terms of, solar energy, in terms of developing water sources and so on. I mean, there's so much there. It's just a matter of really helping. And can I also, final point, a very important report that was published last year called The State of the Great Green Wall estimated that to complete this great symbol of Africa, would cost $43 billion. Sounds a lot, but let me give you two statistics to compare with. Qatar is spending $220 billion on hosting the FIFA World Cup for 1 month.
Right.
$220 billion.
Right.
And in the United States, the National Retail Federation estimated that this year alone, $27.4 billion was spent on St. Valentine's Day. So compare that to the 43 billion that's needed for Africa to deliver this. And there's no comparison. Africa is giving the greatest value to humanity, hands down.
Definitely. Thank you so much for those comparisons. I mean, when you actually look at it like that, it really isn't a lot of money for investment into our futures across the entire world, really. So thank you so much for that, Don. Alex, so for those of you who are yet to see the film explores creative cultures across the region through music and the arts through several communities. Alex, why is it so important for collaborations through various countries involved in the Great Green Wall?
So yeah, and I think it's worth saying that, you know, this project really started as a Pan-African vision, you know, with its roots tracing back to the visionary leader of Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara. And I think one of the really interesting things about this project is that it is African driven. It was an African idea. It's not an imposed solution. And it, you know, bringing together really the leaders from across the continent behind a collective cause and purpose. And I think, you know, ultimately the wall will only be completed through deep collaboration at the political level, you know, ensuring that there's momentum from across all the participating countries to build and grow it, but also, you know, from a very practical perspective on the ground. And that really extends itself, you know, to ensuring that the kind of the myriad of hugely promising models that are already working, some of which, you know, orientate themselves around, you know, traditional knowledge, but also kind of, you know, cutting edge technical solutions that are helping to evolve the wall in one country, are also, you know, able to then upscale and be replicated in other countries. And you know, in order to really kind of aggregate the best insights, tools and models for overcoming the challenges ahead. So, you know, while each country has their own section of the wall to tend to, the vision, you know, ultimately won't be realized, I don't believe, without deep kind of partnership, you know, sharing of knowledge and collaboration at all levels. And I think that, you know, the spirit of Pan-Africanism is something, you know, the film tries to capture and bring alive, and really, I think, is at the heart of the Great Green Wall, from the leaders who first, you know, set out this kind of audacious vision. And I would say that, you know, what is often, I guess, hailed as, it's still early on really in the completion of the Great Green Wall, but I would say that one of the kind of foundational kind of successes for the project is a political one, in the sense that, you know, it has been kind of fully embraced as a Pan-African initiative. It obviously started in the Sahel region of Africa, but as Don and Elvis mentioned, you know, this vision is also kind of inspiring kind of new branches that speaks, I guess, to that kind of Pan-African narrative. You know, Elvis often talks about the fact that, yeah, one of the key achievements is the fact that countries from across the Sahel and other places really have come around this kind of collective vision of restoring their environment and many of the kind of the deeply rooted kind of social and economic challenges that are associated with that. And so in many ways, I guess, getting so many players around the table to kind of agree that this is something that needs to happen at a continent-wide level really is kind of unprecedented. And the challenge now is how to kind of, I guess, sustain that level of collaboration and really upscale it so that that this is delivered. And I think that, you know, while this is African driven, it is also a kind of a collaboration that requires the support of the, you know, the whole of humanity. So yeah, it really does feel to me like it's a major kind of collective endeavor.
Yeah, definitely, Alex. More emphasizing the idea of for Africans by Africans. So yeah, really excited for what that's going to yield. So across the Sahel, there has been vast insecurities over the last decades, if not, and we've seen this occurring from security issues and people not wanting to go to particular areas of, so from the west, it would be the north, and for the northern countries, it would be the southern part due to insecurity. So, Sarah, can you maybe shed some light on what security measures should be accommodated to these communities who are very close to the area of the Great Green Wall, and how that's going to really influence your dedication to keep planting and keep growing, or actually supporting the plan?
Sure. I mean, if we're to really look at the Africans, and we're African, I think realizing that people are very diverse. And nations are quite different, and individuality is something that should be celebrated, and so is diversity. So I think it's quite difficult and quite naive to expect countries from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean to all agree and all have the exact same aspirations and demographics and stuff like that. And we need to approach this in a way which is very sort of real and sober. There are insurgencies, there are inter-ethnic wars, there's conflict, there's migration, there's geopolitics going on, there's resource management pressures. There are all sorts of different tensions pulling each other. However, we're extremely lucky that I think we live in a world now, and I don't mean to sound poetic, but success stories that reach people's livelihoods are actually something that the entire world is hungry for, simply because, it's 2021 and the entire world is scrambling to find a vaccine, and rich countries have access to vaccines and poorer countries are falling behind. And it's incredibly important not just to have hope for the sake of hope, but to have something that fully represents the physical success of humans when they come together for a collective good. And that's an opportunity in Africa that I think the entire world would look at in admiration. We're tired of having, failed youths, and Africa is comprised of youth. They're all looking for jobs. We don't want any more migration in and out caused by lack of resource management and caused by having the decision makers and the politicians and the donors do all the deciding for you. So the first thing would be to communicate and to narrate the story of the Great Green Wall, and to make this communication very accessible. And I think that's a great way to start it off with music, because music is universal, and also having a film, visualizing this space and humanizing the problems is incredibly important to galvanizing the entire world behind this. That's one. The second one is to create political momentum. And if you plant a tree that grows food, everyone is interested in sustaining and protecting that tree. If you plant trees that grow flowers, the industry and the exporters and the packaging and that sort of sector of flower trade will be interested in protecting these flowers. That's just the way it works. And this is an opportunity to grow natural well-being and equity all across Africa. So it would be very difficult to say no. It's like the Sustainable Development Goals. Why would you argue any of the Sustainable Development Goals? They're genuinely quite, humble, good causes to make people's lives better. The Great Green Wall, apart from sustaining it, has to be collective human action. There have to be communities built closer to these walls to get people to sustain their jobs, to create mobility, and to create a physical connection between these growing landscapes and people. So it shouldn't be a kind of border, very isolated project.
Yeah.
It needs to have cities grow around it. It needs to have communities, animals, biodiversity. And then it becomes part of the built narrative of the entire African culture. It doesn't become a protectorate,
Yes.
just isolated from people. You know, the more you access something, the more it becomes closer to hearts and minds, and the more it becomes a reality. So the benefits of it are food security, having an inclusive approach, and it should be bottom up. The beneficiaries of these walls are the custodians of it. And that's very important to communicate everywhere else, because a lot of the time you get the representation by those who are completely isolated from it. So engagement, political momentum, collective action, common interests, and also the creation, which is a more sort of national security kind of language, the creation of a common enemy. And in this case, it's hunger, it's lack of hope. That is your common enemy. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Sarah. I really appreciate what you said about natural equity. And I think like it's literally investing in our futures. And there's a lot of hope for, you know, what Africa could become, and just taking some time out to just protect ourselves through our own natural equity. On that, Elvis, I really want to maybe find out more about what you were saying earlier on with protecting the trees. And we understand once they've been planted, the next thing is obviously to keep them growing. How technical or how difficult is it going to be to maintain the trees to grow to a particular level where they can become canopies to protect the soil, or where they can become, you know, real carbon emission observers? But like how fundamental is the social and ecological issues to this regard, Elvis?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to briefly interrupt before, I'm very sorry, but actually I have a hard stop at 4:30, and I actually have to go into another panel discussion. So I'm gonna have to make my excuses, and lovely to meet everybody. But
no worries. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Alex, see you later.
Thank you.
Yes, Augusta. Yeah. How difficult or how easy is it to get these trees to grow and things like that? It's all about the approach, the system, the method that should be applied. We have the agroecological system, which is more or less a landscape approach that takes care of everything. Everything. As I said, for these trees to grow, you have to take care of everything. So that is, I don't want to put it as a challenge. That is the opportunity.
Okay.
That's the opportunity that we have in what we are doing, the sustainable land management and restoration, because it provides the opportunity to tackle these environmental challenges from a broad spectrum point of view, rather than saying we are going to plant trees. Because when you say you're planting trees, you are just, it's like you are working in isolation. It's like you're just going to plant the trees, and the trees will be protected. Look, in yesteryears, as you know, if you were an observer or a practitioner of forestry, during the post-independent era, you used to see a community forest or forest around with placard. You know, you see a big signboard. This is a government domain, no entry, right? And years down, what remained from those trees were just that placard, government domain, no entry. Everything else, all the trees and all the animals had been wiped out. And that led to the introduction of what was called the participatory approach participatory approach and community forestry, where they realized that there was an urgent need to take care of the basic needs of both the communities and of the ecosystem, the biodiversity, if those woodlot and forest areas were to survive, were to be sustainable. It was no longer the days when we've gone are the days when forest guard used to put on uniform and hold long guns to stand and say, this is a protected area, no entry. Communities could not even go in to pick wood, talk less of, not even to get spring water, which was the mainstay of those communities in those days. So, so I see restoration as a huge opportunity for the stakeholders, for the governments and development partners and international development firms to come in and to develop these communities from an ecosystem point of view, taking care, mindful of everything that is every sector and every actor. So once we use the indigenous knowledge, we use conservation agriculture, we take care of the water, we take care of the ecosystem itself, while considering, knowing that these are rangelands as well as agricultural fields, as well as conservation areas, as well as areas that habitats, both for animals and for humans. This thing will work. It's an opportunity. It's a challenge when, and that is one of the biggest problems we have in conservation. Many projects are short term. You can see somebody would develop, or an organization will say, okay, we have a restoration, or let's say an afforestation or forestation program in this region, and the program is for 3 years and it's over. That is preposterous. That's impossible. If you want a program to make any difference, especially in the drylands of Africa, you should be budgeting from 5 to 10 years, because you are dealing in difficult areas. And you should budget not only for planting of trees, you should budget for growing of trees. You should budget for all the other activities if you want this trees to go to the areas of storing carbon, providing shade, and providing shade for agroforestry, for planting of vegetables, because most of the trees in these areas provide shade for other smaller plants that don't need so much sunlight, like vegetable gardens and multi-purpose gardens. Yes. Definitely. So for this to happen, there are lots of things that needs to happen, but those are opportunities rather than challenges.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because these are symbiotic, because if you have the animals there, their dropping will serve as natural manure for this and that. And if you use the mulching system and you use the conservation system, it will be quite easy. So these are opportunities. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you, Elvis, for that in-depth ecological little lecture. So the final question for Don now is, so the world so far has raised about $8 billion US. Confirm, just me if that's correct or otherwise, and I know in independent organizations and big organizations, and particular from the African Union, are planning to support, but what can individuals or communities do to actually support this project?
Well, maybe Elvis would be best to tell you in terms of precisely how much has been raised so far. But what we do know that recently President Macron hosted a One Planet Biodiversity Summit in Paris. And during that summit, which looked extensively at the Great Green Wall, 14 billion was pledged. But again, I look at pledges as like a mirage. You know, you think you see it, but it has to be delivered on. And part of our work is to ensure that those who made the pledges actually follow through and do deliver on it. But we really have to look at how do we help Africa to find the 43 billion and possibly more to actually deliver this extraordinary project. I mean, obviously it's going to come from national budgets, but I think that, so many resources were literally stolen from Africa over the centuries. And given the fact that this is an existential threat, not just facing Africa, but the whole of humanity. And when we see the damage, for example, to the Amazon at the moment, where literally the lungs of humanity are being torn asunder, under the leadership of Bolsonaro, what Africa is doing is growing new lungs for the earth. And I think we have collectively, as part of one humanity, a responsibility to assist Africa and to work with Africa in actually growing those lungs. And so I would really hope to see, for example, the United States of America and communities. I'm actually working at the moment with an African American group called the National Center for Race Amity, and we're putting together an extraordinary project relative to the Great Green Wall and the transatlantic slave trade. You'll hear more about that in the coming months. But this is a way in which we can get not just the African American community, but hopefully their friends and the other diasporas that make up, the United States of America, getting behind it and getting behind Africa particularly. Just to throw out as well, one of the areas we're looking at is that there are 5,000 miles from Senegal to Djibouti. So we have this idea of trying to create 5,000 Great Green Wall champion groups. Like it could be a classroom, it could be a college, it could be a school, it could be a workplace, for example, where people would say, we want to support a particular mile of the Great Green Wall. The way is you would know, of course, as you drive along the United States on the freeways and so on, you'll see that there are certain parts that are actually sponsored by local communities. So a little bit like that. And I would be really hoping that those champion groups would stay with it for 10 years, that every year that they would get involved maybe with the local community, and that they would help to raise maybe $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever. All of that is going to make a big difference in the end, and really civil society groups are the ones who will create the excitement in the government, but who also can ensure the governments are accountable as well in terms of any pledges that they make.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you so much, Don. I think the importance of community engagement can be overshared. There's so much conversation that needs to be had about it. I had heard about the Great Green Wall a few years ago, unfortunately, but for so many others who are still like, oh, what is this? I didn't know this was happening in Africa. So there is a lot of engagement, and I'm really hopeful in this conversation we can really push for more, like you said, communities, schools, workplaces to just really get involved in what's for Africa and being built by Africans. So one of the global mentees, Caroline Gumbabia, so sorry if I ruined your name, from Malawi, actually asked the question about how she could get involved. And I think you've practically answered that question. So it's really just an instance of using this series of conversations, having these kind of conversations more often, actually. I think actually kicking the ball rolling and, getting more people to share their thoughts and getting more people to obviously share their opinions is a really good way to keep engagement and really just let people know what's happening in their continents. I mean, this is about to be the biggest, structure, and yet people still don't know about it. So there is a lot to be done on that front. So thank you so much, Elvis and Don and Heba, for the conversation. So Alex and Sarah did have to drop off earlier, but this has been so insightful for me. I think for myself and a lot of the audience, it was one thing hearing about the Great Green Wall in passing, but really just knowing that there are people who are actively still trying to make efforts or actively trying to support the dream, essentially. And I think this is so close to becoming the African dream. We've really pushed for it. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to obviously have more engagements and really see how else we can all contribute to, first of all, make sure the sustainable development goals are ultimately reached and ensure that Africans have more employability, more opportunities, the climate issues are being solved just for a long stretch of green across the continent. So thank you so much for your time again. And the global mentee, the Mentee Global, really appreciates your dedication coming on the panelists today. We really look forward to having you on another discussion, hopefully on the follow-up of the Great Green Wall when it's completed. Fingers crossed. But thank you so much and have a lovely, lovely day. Bye
Thank
now.
you so much, Oza, for moderating.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ogusa and Heba Don. We'll keep in touch.
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.